pedigree diagrams are one of the ways that we have of looking at how genetics and phenotypes are linked together within families. So what we're actually looking at with a pedigree diagram is rather like a family tree. And that's an important thing because when we talk about Punnett squares, remember we're talking about genetics. If you were to look at a family tree, you wouldn't see those genetics. You would just see what the person looks like, okay? So pedigree diagrams are all about the occurrence of the phenotype. Okay, so we're looking at a phenotype rather than a genotype. And so we often do these apparently for people and a quick Google for racehorses as well. So we're looking at characteristics here. What we then do is we can work backwards from the phenotype to the genotype if we have enough information. Remember that your genotype is your genetics of the individual, whereas the phenotype is the characteristic that is expressed. Okay, so it's what it looks like as a result of the genetics. Okay, so how do we do that? Okay, so the problem is our heterozygotes, of course, because remember that if you are homozygous dominant, for example, if you have B, then you've got brown eyes. That's it. Okay, and if you've got little b, you're homozygous recessive, now you've got blue eyes, right? But that heterozygote is a problem because the phenotype is brown eyes, but we don't know if we look at somebody with brown eyes, are they homozygous dominant or are they heterozygous? Because the phenotype of both of these two different genotypes is the same. So what we're actually doing then, in order to work backwards from the phenotype to the genotype, we have to look at two things. We have to look at the recessive phenotype. Because, of course, if we're looking at it and we say, no, the recessive phenotype, there's a blue-eyed person, we know what their genotype is. From there, we have to think about inheritance. Okay, well, if these two brown-eyed parents had a blue-eyed baby, then the parents must be heterozygotes because there has to be blue genes hiding in there somewhere. So we're using that combination to actually work like a detective to figure out what's going on in this pedigree diagrams and what are the different genotypes hiding behind phenotypes that we're looking at. Okay, so pedigree diagrams are showing occurrence of a phenotype, and we have to then work backwards to figure out the genotypes using what our recessive phenotype is and patterns of inheritance. So a few other simple things to bear in mind when you're looking at a pedigree diagram, because it's important that you actually understand the diagram you're looking at. So we have a few things. First off, if it's a square, we're indicating male. If it's a circle, we're indicating a female. If it is shaded, so your square is colored in or your circle is colored in, shading represents having the phenotype. So if we're looking at brown eyes, any person with brown eyes would be shaded, any person with blue eyes would not be shaded. If we were looking at blue eyes, it would be the other way around. So it's really important that you have a very close look at the information in your question, because that's going to tell us, okay, what is the phenotype of this pedigree diagram, and therefore what is linking in with our shading and shading, because of course that contributes to our understanding of the genetics. Okay, so we then, of course, have lines in these things. We have horizontal lines and we have vertical lines. So our horizontal lines indicate connections, either between parents or between siblings. So this is parents or siblings. A vertical line indicates inheritance from parent to offspring. Okay, so let's have a look at what this actually looks like when we put it all together. An example of a diagram. So we're not going to do shading for a moment. We're just going to have a look at this diagram and see what's going on. So first thing you can see is that you've got 3 generations. Okay, we start up here. Okay, there's the grandparents, there's the parents, and then there's children. Okay, so you can work backwards. But the thing is, each line is representing a generation. Okay, so remember we said our horizontal lines are either indicating our parents, connection, or siblings. So this one here is between 2 with a vertical down within it, between them. So this is a parents. And then you can see this pair also is parents. And in each case, we have a male and a female, a male and a female. Okay, so we've got sexual reproduction going on here. Then we said the other one is siblings. So you can see that these 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, are all children of parents A and B. Okay, but now child number 4 is also a parent. So parents C and D had then offspring. Let's call them 5, 6, and 7. So 5, 6, and 7 are all siblings again. So each time we have a connection between the 2 with inheritance, then we have siblings that are offspring that are siblings. Okay, so let's get rid of our A's and B's quickly, as we don't need them. We don't normally have numbers on these things. Okay, so how many, oh, sorry, we have one more word to add in there. This one here, oh, helps if you're on a pen. Right, there we go. This one here is showing offspring. So these top 2 parents had 4 children. 1, 2, 3, 4. These 2 parents, this is their offspring line. And they had 1, 2, 3 children. So bear in mind, I mean, obviously we've been through Punnett squares and we know X's and Y's and we get different ratios. And so here 3 girls, 1 boy, 2 boys, 1 girl. This is not the answers of a Punnett square. And it really isn't, because now we're looking at a real life situation. So Punnett squares are giving us, remember, all the options. It's not saying that every pair of parents is going to have 4 children and their genetics are going to be one of each of the options that we get on our Punnett square. Okay? It's looking at probabilities of a child being that genetic combination. Here we're looking at actual families. So it's a different case of probabilities. So when we now have, oh, that was the other thing. So looking at sexes. So we have males that are squares and females that are circles. So this first line of children was 1, 2, 3 female, 1 male. That's the offspring for those parents. Okay, these two parents, then we have their offspring. We have 2 males, 1 female. So 1 female, 2 male. So of course, sex is always important. For example, if we're considering a sex-linked characteristic, then it's going to be a case of we need to definitely know which ones are males and which ones are females. So we need to keep that in mind as we're working through. So we have parents, siblings, offspring, we have males, we have females. Okay, so the other thing is, let's imagine that we had some characteristic. Let's say the mother had it here, then she would be shaded. And let's say 1 daughter had it and 1 son had it. And then of his kids, let's say 1 daughter had it. So this is a sort of now what we'd be looking at is some shaded, some unshaded. We have males and we have females. And we say, okay, this is a pedigree diagram for a specific characteristics. What's the genotype of a particular person in this diagram? And that's where it gets interesting. That's where you've got to work on your detective skills. So I've got a couple of examples that we're now going to work through and have a look at how do we go from shaded and unshaded and figure out what are the genotypes. So let's look at Eyecolor for the fun of it. So this is our pedigree diagram. So we have a female and a male. They have kids. One girl, 1 boy, another girl. She gets married to a man, they have babies, and they have 2 girls. So that one is shaded. This one is shaded. This one is shaded. Shading is very slow with this little pen. Okay, and this one is shaded. Shade in circles for a change. Okay, so we are looking here at a pedigree diagram for Eyecolor. So we know already, because we've used Eyecolor as quite a big example throughout our genetics, that we would have capital B, which would be our dominant allele, and that is for brown eyes. Our recessive allele is a little b, and that is for blue eyes. So now we want to figure out what's the genotypes. So remember we said we're going to look at 2 things. We are going to look at the recessive phenotype, and we're going to look at patterns of inheritance. So our possible genotypes will be BB, homozygous dominant, little b, homozygous recessive, and big B, little b. This one will be brown, this one will be blue, and this one will be brown. So we're setting ourselves up with what are we working with. Now, seeing as we've got lots of options, let's get colorful. So we know that, remember, we have expression. Let's complete that. Expression of the phenotype is shown by the shaded. So all of those shaded ones have brown eyes. But that means that these 3 unshaded are showing the recessive phenotype. So we know their genetics are BB, little b, because they're all blue eyes. So now we've got to work backwards and we've got to say, okay, well, if these are little b, what are our options? So if we work down from the bottom, I find that's often the easiest place to start. Okay, so this blue-eyed child came from 2 brown-eyed parents. But in order to get 2 little b's, there has to be a little b on both. In order to have the brown eyes that they are showing, they must have that dominant. So now we know that both parents here are heterozygotes. Okay, we know that this one is big B, little b, which means that he had to get a little b from somewhere, she had to get a little b from somewhere, and a big B from somewhere. Well, the little b could only have come from, well, actually, sorry, the little b could have come from mother or father. We don't know. But the big B could only have come from this brown-eyed father. So we know that there's a big B hiding here, because otherwise it wouldn't be here. We also know that this is showing the phenotype of brown eyes, so there's a big B here. And we know this last female down here also showing dominant phenotype, so also has that B. But now how do we know? What are now the options in terms of genotypes? Well, let's fill in some recessives. In order to have a little b child, we would have to have little b from the mother and little b from the father. So he must be a heterozygote. Because remember, we're going to get one allele from the mother and one allele from the father. So there would have to be a little b coming from each of them. And this is why those Punnett squares and practicing Punnett squares are so important, because that helps to build your understanding of how we can pull different options of gametes in order to combine our two alleles. Okay, so this child here, they've got brown eyes. Are they homozygous or heterozygous? Well, the only way they could be homozygous is if they had another capital B from the other parent. There isn't one there. So they've got the capital B from their father, from their mother, they get a little b. So that child is also heterozygous. This child down here at the bottom is a little bit more interesting, because this capital B could have come from either parent. So it could be capital B from one parent, capital B from the other parent. This would give us brown eyes. Or could be capital B from one parent, little b from the other parent. We don't know. We don't know if this is now a homozygous dominant or a heterozygous. So the only way you would know is if that girl went and then had children, and then you'd have to look at her offspring to see, have I got lots of brown eyes, have I got some blue eyes going in, what's the genetics of the male, and then you can work further in. But so when you're working with a pedigree diagram, sometimes you can figure them out. Brilliant, fantastic. Other times you've got options, and you must keep that in mind. That whenever you've got that dominant phenotype, you could be homozygous dominant or you could be heterozygous. And you've got to think, okay, what information do I have that's going to help me choose which of the one have I got, or have I got an option of both? Are we happy with this one for Eyecolor? Okay, cool. So let us have a look at now a pedigree diagram, and we're combining with a sex-linked characteristic. So each diagram you look at can also be a completely different configuration depending on what details you're given. So in this case, we had 2 offspring. Each of them has now reproduced, and each pair produced 2 more. And we have 50-50 boys and girls. Okay, so we're going to say this one here is expressing our phenotype, and this one here is expressing our phenotype. And our phenotype here is color blindness. So a little bit of a recap. Remember, color blindness is X-linked. So you can have a normal X or a colorblind X. Okay, and the Y, of course, doesn't have the portion. So if you are XX, no color blindness. XX, now we have a carrier. XC would be a female who's colorblind. XY, normal male. XCY, colorblind male. Those are our possible genetics. So if we now then go and look at our diagram, okay, pedigree diagram for colorblindness. So these means that these are XCs, Ys, these two, because these are males who are colorblind. Okay, so working backwards. This male here doesn't have colorblindness. So we know that he is an XY. In fact, we know that all of these males are plain old XYs because they're not colorblind. Okay, see we have a question, why doesn't the male get the C on the Y? Okay, so this is remember your X chromosome and your Y chromosome are different lengths. So there is no corresponding position on the Y chromosome that equates to this piece of the X chromosome that we're working with. So this is a sex-linked characteristic. Have a look at the live lesson from last week, and that will give you more detail on sex-linked characteristics. 2 weeks ago, sorry, not last week. Okay, please try and send your questions through the chat because I do get a bit confused with that whole Q&A thing. Okay, so where are we now? We've got all our X, Y. So all our males on this diagram are sorted out because they're simple. Okay, we have expression of that recessive phenotype, so we're sorted. So now we want to know what's going on with the women in this diagram because we know that they've all got an X. Okay, none of them have the color blindness, so all of them have a plain X because it's masking whatever they may or may not be color carrying. Okay, so in order to get a colorblind male here, we would have to have a carrier mother there. So she must be X and XC. In order for her to be a carrier, her mother must also be a carrier because her father doesn't have color blindness. So her mother must also be XC. So now if we come down the left-hand side, we have an XCY, okay? So there's the XC. This one here, this we've got options again because this could be X from the father, X from the mother, or X from the father, XC from the mother. So we don't know if this individual is a carrier or not. So if we work down here, we could have X from the mother and XC from the father. The only other option would be XC from the mother, XC from the father, but that's not going to work because, remember, XC, now we would be expressing, we would be colorblind. So we know that one is not an option. So this XC from the father would have to be combined with an X from the mother. Does that help us differentiate between in this mother? Nope, because both of them, she's got a plain X as an option. So if we come now down to this one, what have we got here? Well, we could have X from the father, X from the mother. Or we could have X from the father, XC from the mother. So again, we have an option. This female could be a carrier or not. We don't know. So this one is definitely a carrier. This one is definitely a carrier. This one is definitely a carrier. But these two remain our question marks because we don't have enough information to figure out what their actual genotypes are. So we can have that case in a pedigree diagram because we're always working back from the phenotype to the genotype.